Namaste, Sat Shri Akal, and welcome to Dharma Explorers. Dharma Explorers is a series of conversations with prominent personalities who are strong supporter of dharmic principles but were not born in Hindu household. I'm your host, Jay Bansal, along with Amitabh Mittalji as my co-host. We are both associated with the Vishwa Hindu Parishad of America, where I serve as the Vice President of Education and Amitabhji as the General Secretary. Today, we are honored to have Sadhvi Bhagwati Saraswati ji joining us from Rishikesh, Bharat. Sadhvi ji, pranam. It is truly a pleasure to reconnect with you after nearly a year.
It's such a joy to be with you, and I am so impressed by the great work that VHP is doing in America. I actually just had the wonderful opportunity to witness the wonderful energy and cohesiveness of it during the time of the Ram Janambhoomi Mandir being opened, because I was in New York at that time. I couldn't be in Ayodhya because I had to be actually at the United Nations on the 24th. And so I had spoken with Sri Alok Kumarji here before leaving Bharat and had mentioned that I would be there. And he reached out to the team there who contacted me. And I had this beautiful, beautiful honor and blessing of addressing the Hindu community of New York and New Jersey at Times Square on Sunday night, the 21st, while the mandir was going to be opened Monday morning, right around the same time. And it was amazing because it was sub-zero temperature.
Sure.
New York, New York in the winter time, snow is on the ground. Everybody is wrapped up in, mittens and hats and scarves and jackets. But Times Square was full, hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of people singing and dancing. And, you expect that Josh in Ayodhya. You expect it in Bharat. But to see it in Times Square when I said, Jai Shri Ram, and to just have all of Times Square come back with Jai Shri Ram and Bharat Mata Ki Jai, it was just so extraordinary. And I know that all of that wonderful, wonderful work and organization and coordination was all done by VHP of America. So thank you for the beautiful, beautiful seva and the great opportunity to be there with you all.
Absolutely. Amitabhji was, of course, right in the middle of all that. And of course, all the energy was coming from Sri Ram Lala himself. It was just all the tremendous energy that, the Hindu diaspora here was able to generate. And thank you for mentioning that. Before we get into any of the topics that we want to explore today, let me just give a brief background of yours to our viewers. So Sadhviji is the renowned spiritual leader, author, and motivational speaker based in Rishikesh, Bharat. Originally from Los Angeles and a graduate of Stanford University, Sadhviji has been ordained into the sacred order of sannyasa by her guru, His Holiness Pujya Swami Chidanand Saraswati ji. And she's been living at the Parmarth Niketan Ashram for the last 26 years. She oversees a variety of humanitarian projects, teaches meditation, lectures, writes, counsels individuals and families, and serves as a unique female voice of spiritual leadership throughout India and the world. She is actually the author of #1 best-selling memoir called Hollywood to the Himalayas, A Journey of Healing and Transformation. A wonderful book which I've had the honor of receiving from Sadhviji directly and had the pleasure of reading through good part of it. She's also the international director of Parmarth Niketan and general secretary of the Global Interfaith Alliance. and many other wonderful projects. So with that, once again, it's really great to be in your presence, Sadhviji, and looking forward to an inspirational conversation on variety of topics. Oh, by the way, this is important to mention. She was awarded the Lifetime Achievement Award by the U.S. President Joe Biden for her lifelong commitment to volunteer service. Congratulations for that honor. Before we get into any of the heavier topics, you wrote this wonderful book, From Hollywood to the Himalayas, which really is, your life's journey in so many ways, right? So here you are, born in a privileged household, but had a deeply troubled childhood. You excelled academically, went to a prestigious universities, Stanford for doctoral program, married. All in all, you experienced the best and the worst of what America, had to offer. But then you went to Bharat, a trip that you were actually skeptical about, and that changed the direction of your life forever. So I think it would be an interesting narrative coming from you directly, if you wouldn't mind just touching on some of the highlights of that journey of yours.
Sure. And it's really, for me, it's been a journey of grace. As you said, the trip was essentially accidental, meaning that I didn't know there was anything to search for. I was raised in a very privileged family. I had, as you said, all of the best that the West has to offer. It was a family with a lot of money, a lot of opportunity, a lot of great blessings, a lot of everything, whatever you could want, I had it. And no one had ever said, by the way, that's not what life's about. By the way, that isn't actually where happiness and peace comes. By the way, this is all just nice, but essentially it's distraction. I was 25 and I was not religious, but I was also not one of those people who say, well, I'm not religious, but I'm spiritual. I was a scientist. I was an academic. I was in the midst of getting a PhD in pediatric neuropsychology. And so the fact that I wasn't religious or spiritual never really occurred to me. It was never something that I had felt was missing in my life. And I agreed to come only because I was a very strict vegetarian. I was not raised in a vegetarian family, but I had become a vegetarian spontaneously in my childhood. And I was a very pukka vegetarian. And my mom used to laugh when we'd go to restaurants and the waiters would come over and she would say, pull up a chair, sit down, you're going to be here for a while. Because I always had so many questions about the stock of the soup and the sauce and the seasoning, and that nothing had eggs, nothing had chicken stock, nothing had anything, which is obvious when you're cooking in a vegetarian home. But when you're in a non-vegetarian restaurant situation, they throw chicken broth in everything. They throw egg whites in everything. So when India was suggested, now bought it, but at the time it was, we were thinking of it was obviously already bought it, but we were thinking of it as India. When it was suggested, I agreed to come only because of being such a strict vegetarian. And I knew कि कम से कम मैं आराम से बढ़िया से खाना खा पाऊंगी. And came traveling, and Rishikesh was the very first place that we came, and it was 1996. So there was no Google to ask कि कहाँ जाओ, करे क्या. We had this Lonely Planet guidebook, and it was about 500 pages. And I opened it in Delhi and literally just saw Rishikesh. And it looked really nice. It wasn't too far from Delhi. And it had mountains and it had a river and it had yoga. And all of these things just seemed like, yeah, chalo pehle udhar chalenge, or fared, wahan se we'll see where else we want to go. We come to Rishikesh and I go to the banks of Ganga. I didn't even know that the river was holy. I just knew I was hot, I was tired, and I wanted to put my feet in the river and just freshen up and calm down and, just get refreshed. And I got to the banks of Ganga. Or ma Ganga ka darshan karke. It was like this veil was pulled off of me. But not only off of my eyes, it was pulled off of every aspect of me, how I saw, how I understood, how I thought, how I saw myself. And as you mentioned, that I had also been through a lot of struggles in my childhood and adolescence. And so I always lived with kind of a pervasive sense of feeling like the core of who I wasn't enough. Certainly wasn't divine. I wasn't I wasn't enough. And I had to strive and work and get straight A's and prove myself. And then I would feel worthy. Then I would feel deserving. And in that moment, when I had this experience of the divine, it was so powerful because everything was the divine. It was like it began as I looked out over Mother Ganga. But suddenly, whatever I saw, I was seeing the divine in it. And when I looked at myself, I was seeing the divine. And it was the very first time in my life that I had ever even conceived of the idea that I was divine, that I was one with God, that God was me. And it was just the most extraordinary experience of awakening and touch. And I knew I found my home. I knew this is where I'm meant to be. And so over the next week or 10 days, I had this incredible series of things happen to me that brought me into Parmarth Nikatan, that brought me to the feet of my guru, His Holiness Puja Swami Chidanand Saraswati Ji Maharaj, that made me know that this, not just this in general Rishikesh, but this Parmarth Nikatan right here in Puja Swamiji's seva at his feet, in, that grace, that this specifically was where I was meant to be. And it's a long story. He eventually sent me back to finish first the semester, and then the degree. But pretty much I've been here continually since then. And it's just been such an incredible blessing. And then in June of the year 2000 on Ganga Dashera, I was blessed to be initiated into sannyas. I had wanted it kind of from the beginning, but Puja Swamiji made me wait and get my parents' blessings. And I think कि उनको भी लगा कि छोटी सी लड़की है, 25 साल की है, कम से कम थोड़ा सा मतलब सोचने दो, let's see what happens. And so finally by 2000, he very, very graciously gave me that blessing.
So I don't know how religious your family was, but you said you were not very religious. But nevertheless, you at some point you came into Sanatan Dharma. your identity is like a warm blanket, you know. So I wonder how it was, you know, what kind of emotions and experience you went through leaving that warm blanket to something that was, you know, quite alien to your being. And I'm wondering how your family and friends reacted to it and continue to respond today.
Sure. So I actually was raised in a Jewish family,
Okay.
and it was, as I mentioned, not religious. We went to synagogue because it mattered to my grandmother.
Okay.
Our local synagogue had the first Friday evening of every month was family evening, and it mattered very much to my grandmother that we go. So we would go to synagogue on the first Friday of every month. But for me, Judaism had been about the culture and about the family.
Hmm.
So everything that you did because of your family, your grandparents. You did it because of the ancestors. You did it because of the history of the Jewish people. So the holidays that we celebrated, whether Hanukkah, whether Passover, the main holidays were holidays that signified really important moments in the history of the Jewish people, the history of the Israelis. And those all had felt very meaningful to me. But there had never been really a discussion about God. And so it had all been history and culture and ancestors and land and people and family. But it was never about God. And I remember whenever we'd go to synagogue and the rabbi would give the sermon, that was the time that my friends and I would all escape to the bathrooms and gossip and giggle. And so I think I spent my entire childhood missing every single sermon that was ever given in the synagogue, because that was the time that pretty much everyone under the age of 15 would quietly leave from the hall and go and gather around the bathrooms and, laugh and joke and giggle and whatnot. So I had never had an experience of God. And that experience of God that I had standing on the banks of Ganga, and that experience of God that I continued to have and that continued to grow and expand. I remember after that experience on Ganga, when I heard Puja Swamiji leading the Ganga Aarti, and I didn't know what it was. I didn't speak a word of Sanskrit, a word of Hindi. I had never heard the mantras. I didn't have any idea what was going on. But the power of that Aarti just cracked my heart open in such an incredible way and brought me into such a deep state of oneness with the divine. And so it wasn't like the Hindu God came in and kind of pushed the Jewish God out. It wasn't that at all. In fact, there was no time at which anybody ever said, oh, you need to push that away, or you need to stop thinking this. It was all about expansion. And so the experience of the divine that I had came into a place that had otherwise been empty. There had not been an experience of God in my life. And so when that experience of God came in a Hindu place, in the middle of Hindu ceremonies, on the banks of a river the Hindus consider to be the mother goddess, it filled me with a pervasive sense of the divine. It didn't just fill me with a sense of Hindu God, because I remember going back to America in the years following, and I would be there every once in a while. I would be there overlapping one of the Jewish holidays, and we'd go to synagogue. And it wasn't that I couldn't feel God then. That experience of God that was given to me, that experience of the divine that I had, it was with me wherever I was. And so, and as you know, in Sanatan Dharma, it's the divine is infinite. There is nothing but God. I was actually just talking about that tonight in the Arati, that neither are we polytheistic, nor are we monotheistic in the idea that there's one God sitting somewhere, but that we actually believe there is nothing but God. And so for me, that's been a really, really powerful experience. The idea that you could have a personal relationship with God also has been really powerful. That experience of the divine in form, because in the Jewish tradition, it's considered sacrilege to think of God in form, to worship God in form, and being able to be devoted to Bhagwan Krishna, to Bhagwan Ram, to Hanumanji, to Shankar Bhagwan, to Ma Ganga, has been such an incredible blessing to actually be able to close your eyes and picture in your mind an aspect of, an embodiment of, a manifestation of the divine that fills your heart and connects you to soul so deeply. So both the experience of nothing but God and the experience of, you know, the ecstasy of singing, you know, the Hanuman Chalisa, the ecstasy of sitting at Shankar Bhagwan's feet and meditating and doing Abhishek, that experience and ecstasy is something that has also touched me so, so deeply. And as far as family and friends, so in the beginning, of course, they were really worried. They thought, kuch to ho gaya usko, matlab, you know, they really, really thought I had been brainwashed, that I had been, you know, essentially kidnapped by some kind of a cult and and brainwashed and all of that. But that was only until I actually went back and they saw me. Because, you know, again, in those days, there was no video conferencing. It wasn't like you could just get on FaceTime with somebody and show them that really you're okay. In those days, I was talking to my parents. I remember once a week, we had set up a rule that I would call them every Sunday evening. And so the first Sunday evening, I call them from Delhi. And all I have to tell them is that we saw the Red Fort and I found a place to get decent filtered coffee and we didn't have diarrhea yet and you know sort of things like that. And then the next week, just 1 week later, I'm gushing incoherently about God and Ganga, and I am sure that they thought something very wrong has happened to her. And I found out later on that actually my mother was ready to get on an airplane and bring the cult deprogrammers to, you know, extract her daughter from wherever she'd been kidnapped. But she had a friend in Pune. It's actually a beautiful story. She had a friend in Pune who owned a hotel in Pune. And she calls him and she says, I need you to help me. My daughter has been kidnapped and brainwashed, and I need to come over and rescue her. And I'm going to bring the cult deprogrammers, but I need you to get the police because I don't know how difficult it's going to be, but we've got to rescue her somehow. And her friend said, naturally, he was very worried. Pehle baat to desh ki ijjat hai. Unki friend ki beti aaye aur ye ho gaya. But also he was concerned just about me in general.
Sure.
And so he said, Ki, definitely I'll help. He said, but you've got to tell me what's the name of the ashram? Who is this Swami? Because otherwise the police are not going to come.
Yeah.
And so my mom said, well, the ashram is called Parmarth Nikathan. And she said, I don't know the Swami's name because she just says Swamiji, Swamiji. She said, I don't know his name, but he's the head of Parmarth Nikathan. And this man says to her, if that Swamiji permits your daughter to stay in his ashram, it will be a blessing, not only for her, but for your entire family for lifetimes to come. And that was a story I didn't hear until about 15 years later. Mom finally told that story. So they were in the beginning very concerned. Obviously, her friend telling her that calmed her down a lot. But when Puja Swamiji made me go back, it really showed everyone that no, I hadn't gone crazy. And this was Puja Swamiji's rule. He said, if you're going to stay here, because when he sent me back, I couldn't believe it. I didn't want to go. I felt like I've been given that which I didn't even know to ask for. I didn't even know to dream for. Why in the world would I go back to a world of illusion? It was like I had been gifted paradise. And why would I want to go back to just a materialistic world that meant nothing to me anymore? But he made me go and he said, if you're going to choose this life over that life, he said, you can't just call and say, I'm not coming back. He said, people will always look to discredit you. They will always say, she ran away, she had a breakdown, she was kidnapped, she was brainwashed, she joined a cult. And we didn't even know that they were saying that, but he just intuited it. He understood how the Western mind thinks, even more than I did, having come from that culture. And so he said, you have to go back and you have to get straight A's, because I had been a straight A student. So he said, you have to finish your next semester. You have to get straight A's. And if you're going to come, you're going to come as a model of someone who has chosen a path of spirituality. Because he said, to renounce something that you're failing at is not renunciation.
Sure.
To renounce something that you don't have is not renunciation. And if you're going to serve as a model of consciously choosing a spiritual path, you have to do it from a place of success, a place from being at the top. So what that also did, though, was it enabled my family and my friends to see कि yes, kuch ho gaya, but jo hua was very good, very, very, very good. And as the years have gone by, obviously everyone has just been so incredibly supportive. Friends, people who were former just like classmates or friends have become disciples and bucks. I mean, people really have been so touched and so transformed. And it's been such a blessing to be able to be a channel, a reflector of that light.
Thank you. That's such a beautiful exposition of your, um, the way you describe your connection with the divine. From it's not change. It's an expansion. I think that's just beautiful. And your, parents' reaction, your mother's reaction. I mean, being a, parent and grandparent, I can assure you, it's as natural as it comes. Thank you so much for that.
I want to jump in here. It was just like when you're describing your story, it's I'm gonna call you Dr. Sadhvi Bhagwati Saraswati Strange. Like, Dr. Strange. I don't know if you had the reference. He comes to Kamartaj and your story coming to magical Rishikesh, and putting your feet in the Ganga and Ganga Ma washing over you. Can you describe some, interesting experience, magical experience, which kept you bound to the place? Like, you know, the Dr. Strange having out-of-body experience, which I think you did mention in your talk, but can you share experience which you had, which I think not normal, typical tourist pilgrims, I'll call them tourist pilgrims, like you said, you know, you don't renounce anything, you're just going there. Tourist pilgrims have versus your magical experience, something out of body experience, something that kept you in Rishikesh and in the ashram.
Yeah, it really was. And yet I also really feel like it's Ganga's grace, and there's that possibility, I think, for all of us. I think for me, the only thing that I can say was unique or that I did was I opened my heart and I had that courage to recognize the truth when I saw it. I think a lot of us have experiences like this, but what happens is our minds come in and say, oh, that was nice, but now I have to take care of this. Or that was nice, boy, I would love to stay, but you know, the job and the mortgage and the this and the that. And we don't really let ourselves open to the fullness of the experience. And what's so sad about that is that, yes, for me, my Dharma is to be here, but that's not everybody's Dharma. Just because you have a powerful spiritual experience somewhere doesn't mean that you're meant to stay there. That was just my Dharma. Our scriptures, our shastras, are mostly full of rishis and sages who are householders. You know, it's a very rare monastic, sannyasi, celibate, brahmachari, you know, naraji. Most of the sages and the saints are householders. And so opening yourself to that experience shouldn't be something that people have kind of a immediate wanting to close reaction to, but I think we do. I think a lot of people have that fear of, oh my God, what's that going to do to my life? If I really open myself up to the presence of the divine everywhere in everything in myself, it's, you know, I pretty much didn't stop crying for weeks. I could barely eat. I couldn't sleep. It was a very physiological experience as well. I remember lying in my bed here in the ashram in the night. That's really, you know, traditional kind of ashram tuckets, the wooden tuckets. And I remember lying there and I had so much heat coming from my body that I remember lying there thinking, how was I going to explain to Puja Swamiji that I had burned a hole through the bed frame? And if I was lying on my stomach and if I turned around, I felt like I was just going to literally cause the walls and the ceiling to crumble. It was that much of an expansive divine experience. But honestly, I really think that a lot more people have the beginning, and then our thinking mind comes in and we start telling ourselves what it is or what it isn't, and we start to judge it, or we start to try to explain it, or we start to try to talk about it too much. You know, now in these days, we post it on social media, and that's the best way to get yourself out of the experience, to stop the experience. And I think that if all of us just, wherever we may be, whether it's the banks of Ganga, whether it's in a mandir, wherever it may be, when we have the beginning of that experience of ecstatic union, to really allow ourselves to have it and to go into it and not to push it away, I think you'd see a lot more people opening to it.
A little lighter question. Would you think that you were chosen for this experience or you fell into this experience?
It's an interesting question. I think definitely chosen for it, but I don't mean that in a way as in God plays favorites. I mean, as in, if I hadn't had an experience that was that strong, I wouldn't have stayed. It took, people talk about the touch of God. And I always say, I may have been touched and I missed it. And so God finally had to come with the baseball bat and basically whack me over the head with it in order for me to wake up. So chosen only in that I was given the experience that I needed to be able to live my Dharma. Other people who may be more subtle, be more open, be more aware, could have much more gentle touches and feel that touch and open to their Dharma. But I wouldn't have seen it, I wouldn't have known it unless it were something that was that powerful.
With that baseball bat behind you or that energy behind you, I'll call it energy. I won't call it beating by God. It's energy by God, right? He gives you immense energy. How, and I know you're doing a lot of projects. So what various projects are you doing to make this world a better place, and what you can give guidance to our audience from here to make this world a better place?
Beautiful. So first of all, it's important to realize that I'll share about the project specifically, but I just want to preface it because when we serve what we call seva, seva is a spiritual practice. We perform seva because seva purifies our eyes, our thought, our buddhi, our intellect. Seva is that removes that ignorance, that illusion. And so as we do these projects, as we do this seva, we do it not from the place of we are the great humanitarians and we are the ones serving and they are the ones receiving. We also don't do it from a perspective even of chalo punya milega or, acha karm karna hai. It's not even that. It's really from a place of this is spiritual practice, nimitta matra, to be that instrument in God's hands, and how to really offer everything you do to the divine. It's like that beautiful teaching from the Bhagavad Gita when Bhagwan Krishna reminds us, Yat karoshi yadashnasi, yajjahoshi dadasya, yat tapasyasi konteya, tat kurushwa madarpana. That literally just offer it. Just offer, even all the good stuff. Just offer it. Remember, you are just an instrument, and just offer and offer and offer. So I mentioned that in the beginning because otherwise, even in the doing of good things, ego can creep in, separation can creep in. Oh, we're doing so much more than they are. हम इतनी कर रहे, वो लोग तो कुछ भी नहीं कर रहे. Or an organization may say, well, तो मैं सबसे ज्यादा कर रही हूँ, ये तो कुछ नहीं करती है. And then, even though from an external perspective, you may be doing good work, your spiritual progress is plummeting. And so you're going backwards. So we begin the seva from that spiritual perspective of we are self serving self. And the way that I think about it is, you know, if you're walking down the street and you trip and you fall and you injure your right leg, your left leg will pick up the extra weight. We call that limping. You don't have to say, oh, wonderful humanitarian left leg, you know, could you do me a favor? You don't have to tell it it's going to get punya and good karma phal and that, or a big humanitarian award or whatever. It's just going to do it because it understands the right leg is self. And then when the right leg gets injured, week after week after week after week, the left leg never says, bas, bahut ho gaya, I'm done. Let the right leg pick up the weight for a while. It's only fair. Never says that. It just keeps doing and doing and serving and serving. And that's what Puja Swamiji teaches us, is to serve and to serve and to serve. And so it's not like we sit around and we say, acha chalo isal kya kare, what projects we should take up. It's whatever comes to us from the divine, we take as prasad. And so we run, we build, we sponsor, we help a whole variety of different free schools, both day schools, co-ed day schools, as well as residential Gurukul programs. We have programs for women, women's empowerment, women's vocational training programs. We run a variety of free medical care programs, both at our free clinic at Paramarth Nikatan, but also in rural villages. We do a lot around the environment, water, sanitation, hygiene, climate change, tree plantation, all of that. We do a lot of disaster relief, you know, when disasters happen, whatever is needed, to the extent, you know, in the tsunami of literally rebuilding entire villages and putting in big orphanages and women's centers and, you know, all of that. So it really is a sense of what is needed. We've built 3 ashrams in the sacred land of Mount Sarovar and Mount Kailash. Again, not because we had this idea in advance, but because we went and Puja Swamiji saw, this was back in 1998, and he saw there was nothing there. And people were getting sick, people were dying. It took 5 days to get back to Kathmandu to get anybody any help in those days. There were no bridges over the rivers, there were no roads. And he said, ki kuch hona chahiye. So we built ashrams, we built a medical clinic. We brought out the first encyclopedia of Hinduism and history, an incredible 11-volume compendium of the depth and the breadth of Bharat, of Sanatan Dharma, not just theology, not just scripture, but actually also art and architecture and dance and music and all of the other aspects of our Bharatiya Sanskriti. So, but again, not because that was something, you know, that Puja Swamiji had planned, but because he was sitting in Pittsburgh at the Hindu Jain temple, which he had founded. And people were talking about how this was back in the 80s and how there was so much misunderstanding and misinformation about the Hindu tradition and how all of the other religions had encyclopedias. And Puja Swamiji said, we will do it. And, you know, people couldn't believe it. A sannyasi who spent his school-going years in silence and sadhana, alone in the jungles and forests, he says, we'll do the Encyclopedia of Hinduism. And it was a sankalp. And 25 years later, 1,000 scholars from all over the world later, the encyclopedia was brought forth. So it's really a matter for us of whatever the divine sends to us, puts in our lap as prasad. I always say our only 5-year plan is yes. It's our mission statement. It's our motto is just yes. Whatever God sends us.
From the Sanatana tradition, life is supposed to be guided by the principle of Purushartha. You have these 4 ideals that that you're supposed to be guiding your life: Dharma, Artha, Kam, Moksha. And yet, modernity is pushing us to ignore the first and the last, and is pushing us in the direction of Artha and Kam. What do you think is the impact of that kind of emphasis on those 2 purusharthas on the society at large?
Sure. Well, you're absolutely right. But we have to recognize, number one, this is Kali Yuga. And number 2, that even not in Kali Yuga, if you look at our scriptures, we are constantly being reminded about Dharma. We are being constantly reminded about the point of our lives being to fulfill our Dharma, to attain moksha. Constantly being reminded not to get wrapped up in the veil of Maya, right? I mean, and so the fact that we're getting wrapped up in the veil of Maya, it shouldn't surprise any of us, but it just reminds us of what to do. It's why we meditate. It's why we pray. It's why we do seva. It's why we read scriptures, is because the way that the human mind is structured, and especially in Kali Yuga, but not only in Kali Yuga, is naturally it's going to gravitate toward art and calm. I want to have more, right? Man mange, more. And I want pleasure. I want to feel good in this moment. That experience, that inclination toward sensual pleasures, toward hedonism. This is back to our sort of animal instincts. But this is where our Dharma gives us so many ways out. When you perform yajna here at Parmarth, we have yajna twice a day, morning and evening. In the morning, the whole community gathers and we do a beautiful community yajna ceremony. And in the evening, we have it on the banks of Ganga just before the arti. But I mention it because the Sanskrit word yajna literally, it's manifest as a fire ceremony, but the word literally means sacrifice. Now, in other traditions, when you hear the word sacrifice in scripture and in religious connotations, it's sacrificing an animal.
Yes.
Right? In some cases, it's sacrificing a virgin. There's all kinds of historical references around sacrifice. Our concept of sacrifice is we are sacrificing essentially that animal nature of ourselves. We're not throwing animals in the fire, but we are saying that within me that is not true self, that is my reptilian brain, my mammalian brain, my fight or flight nervous system reaction, my lust, my greed, these things that are part of those physical animal structures and also just animal nature and instincts. Oh God, take them, swaha. Take that and let me be purified. Not the core of who I am. The core of who I am is already one with the divine. Aham brahmasmi. But let me live that and know that in a way in which I'm no longer living pulled by those animal instincts. And so that's where we have these beautiful rituals. Why do we do parikrama? It reminds us, keep the divine in the center. It's the same reason we sit around the Havan Kund. Keep divinity, keep purity in the center. What is your role? Just keep offering in, keep offering in, keep offering in. Why do we put on tilak? To open our third eye, to remind us these two eyes, they see in separation. What I see is an object. That object might make me angry. That object might make me want to possess it. It might make me greedy. It might make me lustful. It might make me jealous. I might covet it. It might seem to be an obstacle that I want to remove from my path. But in any of these cases, it's an it's an object, because these two eyes see like that. So, oh God, let me open my third eye that actually allows me to see the truth, the divinity, not just form, but content. And so we've been given in our Dharma all of these ways to free ourselves from this constant slavery of arth and calm, and to be able to really move into dharma and moksha. But if we don't do them, if we don't meditate, if we don't pray, if we don't go to temple, if we don't perform yagna or arti or kirtan or any of these things, then we're lost in the forest.
Absolutely. Absolutely. We do a lot of these things mechanically, as you say, swaha and idhanamam and all that. But it's good to be reminded as to why we're doing it and what is the significance of that. Thank you. Thank you for that exposition. It's slightly different subject. Hindu soul is stirring. Finally, after 1,000 more years of being under the thumb of foreign rule, it's recognizing its ancient heritage. And yet we have a problem. And the problem is that of lost epistemology. Terms that we use to convey our sense of culture and civilization, they have been really mangled in a very bad way. And I'll give some examples. We use soul for Atma. We use religion for dharma. We use idol for murtis. Lust for kama, and salvation for moksha. And all these are some very common terms we use because you and I are communicating in English. And how do I communicate these concepts except through words like that? So that's one part of the problem. Then we have a problem where we use words that are, without thinking about them. One word that comes to mind is mythology. For our itihasa, for our Puranic history, and so on and so forth. So that is actually a detriment to recovering our civilizational narrative. And I just looking for some words of advice.
Absolutely, I agree fully. I have two different thoughts about this. The first thought is we absolutely must get back to using them. There's no reason to use the English translation. We should just use the actual Sanskrit term, because it's so much richer, it's so much deeper, and it's our heritage. In the same way that we should speak our mother tongue, we should use these terms. And what you'll find is that actually non-Hindi speakers, non-Indians, will learn them and love to use them. We have so many people from all over the world who come here. Just next week, we're having our annual International Yoga Festival, where we have people who come from all over the world doing yoga together on the banks of Mother Ganga. We have people usually from almost 100 countries, sometimes even more than 100 countries. And I mention it because they're all using Sanskrit words and they love it. They're all bringing it into their yogic practices and teachings. People love it. However, the other side that we also have to look at is when we are looking to share our truths. Because when we say Sanatan, we don't mean only in time. Eternal, as the English word, typically means only in time. But Sanatan is not just in time, it's also in space.
Mm.
And what that means is that that which is true in Kurukshetra, in Ayodhya, in Bharat, is also true in Los Angeles, in New York, in Paris, in Tokyo, in Sydney. And if we really want to share these truths, which I think we really need to, because I feel that our Sanatan Dharma has the keys to every single thing that is ailing our planet today. I say this all the time, every chance that I get. It's so true. Whatever you look at, from individual suffering, depression, anxiety, stress, addiction, conflict in the homes, conflict in communities, conflict in nations, war, climate change, environmental destruction, all of that is founded upon the myth of separation. When we feel separate from ourselves, from God, from others, we suffer. And we bring suffering to them. It creates walls and borders and boundaries and division. And at the core of Sanatan Dharma is the awareness of oneness. Whether you look at it in the, yogic tradition of that union, that unity, that we are literally not separate, that we all are one, that same divine that pervades all of us, that, Isha Vasimidam Sarvam, Yat Kincha Jagatyam Jagat, that teaching of that same divine pervading all. Or whether you look at it in the teachings of Vasudev Kutumbakam, the world is a family. In either case, it's all about oneness and togetherness. And that's the answer to everything that is ailing us. It would treat depression, it would treat anxiety, it treats conflict, it treats war, it treats climate change and environmental destruction, because when we realize we are one with the planet, well, we stop harming the planet. But in order for us to share this then, beyond those who have Bhartiya blood in them, beyond those who speak Hindi or other native languages or who understand Sanskrit words, we have to find English translations. Because if you say to somebody, you're not the body, you are Atma, and they say, what does Atma mean? You've got to have an answer. You can't just say, well, it's Atma, because otherwise that teaching is meaningless to them. You have to come up with some semantic way of giving people at least enough of an understanding of what the words mean so that they know the appropriate way to use them. Even if it's not able to give the full depth of it, you've got to give them something so that they can actually use the words. So we don't want to be so stuck and so rigid that we refuse to use the word soul, because we have to use it to define Atma, so that people will understand then when to use the word Atma. If you tell people to move away from being so stuck in calm only, well, you have to help them understand what that means. So we have to be, I think, flexible enough with our language that we are able to teach and share and embrace those who don't actually speak Hindi or Sanskrit.
Thank you. Thank you.
Now, you mentioned conflict this last part about the words, and that made me think you are the co-president of Religions for Peace, and I think it's fair to ask, with all these conflicts going around the world, uh, like we would think that humans like peace, but I again and again see there's never a time where there was not a conflict, there's not war, there's not strife. Um, And we also think that religion can play a role. Can religion really play a role in getting us peace when there are philosophies that forbid um, um, uh, other philosophies to take even in the conversation? You know, it's considered blasphemy by some sects and some religions. Can religion really play a role to get us that peace, a conflict-free world that we all envision in our head? But how do we reach it?
I think yes, but we have to shift from a view of dogma to dharma. Dogma is not going to get us anywhere. And in most cases, when we use the word religion, we're talking about dogma. And all that's going to do is create more and more boundaries and borders. I think this, you think that. But if we can shift from dogma to dharma, and especially to a dharma of oneness, an awareness that, for example, we all breathe the same air. We drink the same water. We eat food that is grown in the same soil. And if that water is polluted, if the air is polluted, if the soil is polluted, we're going to get sick. I mean, one of the things our global interfaith WASH alliance that brings religious leaders and religious communities together for water, sanitation, and hygiene, one of the premises that we're founded upon is that diarrhea doesn't discriminate. Cholera doesn't discriminate. You know, if you've got a polluted river running through your town, it doesn't matter if you're Hindu or Muslim. It doesn't matter what your caste is. It doesn't matter if you're rich or poor. You're going to get sick from that water. And therefore, we need to all come together across these borders, across the boundaries, and work to make sure that the water is clean. And the same is true in our world, that if we can move into an awareness that not only the same air and water and soil, but the same tears and the same heart and the same love and the same attachment, that, you know, regardless of your religion, you love your children. I remember when I was growing up, when I was young, a teenager, in the times of the Cold War between the US and USSR at that time, there was a beautiful song by a singer named Sting from the Police that said, "I hope the Russians love their children too." And it was a song about, you know, the fear of nuclear war and the fear of devastation. And as we love our children, I hope they also love their children so that they don't start a nuclear war. And I think when we recognize that people of every religion love their children, and we love our husbands and our wives and our parents, and we all want to make sure that when we wake up in the morning, our loved ones are still there, and that we're still there, and that we share that sacred common humanity. That's where we need to go. It's not about using religion. We're not going to be able to use religion. What we have to do is find a common ground beyond the differences of how we worship, beyond the differences of prayers and pujas, into really core beliefs around humanity being sacred, around life being sacred, and around teachings of compassion. You know, one of my favorite teachings of the Christian tradition is when Jesus Christ says, love thy neighbor as thyself. And of course, this is core Sanatan Dharma philosophy as well. But what's interesting, and I mention it here because having been raised in the Jewish tradition and then adopting a Hindu tradition, I don't actually know that much about Christianity other than just having grown up amongst many, many Christians. And so when I got into the interfaith world, I started asking people, because one question I always had was, does Jesus Christ properly define what he means by neighbor? Next door neighbor, across the street neighbor, everybody on your block, your zip code, 100-meter radius, sort of what was his definition of neighbor? Because I didn't even know the name of everybody on my block. Loving them was a whole other thing. I couldn't even recognize them. And so if you don't even know someone, how can you possibly love them? And I started asking all of these different Christians and leaders, did he give any specifics, any definition of what he meant? And everyone said no. And to me, scripture is meant to be taken literally. And it's not just that he was being vague. If he didn't give a specific definition of neighbor, to me, what it means is really a core Sanatan Dharma teaching, which is you must love them all. But the only way to love them all, because you can't love someone you don't know, the only way to love everyone is you love God and you realize that everyone is one with God. In the same way that when you love your child, you love every single picture that they draw for you, even if it's just scribbles, because you love the Creator. So you're going to love everything they create. It's a ceramic, it's a painting, it's a drawing, it's whatever it may be. Because you love the Creator, you love every manifestation of the creation. And the only way to be able to actually follow that instruction, as far as what I can figure out, is love God and realize that everyone is one with God, or at the bare minimum, everyone has been created by God. And so therefore is a manifestation of that. And so at the core of traditions, there's teachings in all of our traditions about that. And we just have to find them.
Sometimes looking at the reality on the ground makes you a little bit pessimistic, but it's always nice to have words of optimism coming from someone like yourself. I'm mindful of the hour, but I cannot stop this conversation until we delve into one particular subject, and that is the concept of Vasudhaiva Kutumbakam. It's very instinctively used in and sometimes very loosely used in conversations. I wonder how universal that principle we should view as. Take the example, the earthquake in Turkey. Bharat was the first one to be there on the ground, among the first ones to help. That is acting out our principle of Vasudhaiva Kutumbakam. But they're also known for Islamization activity in India. You have two principles of Vasudhaiva Kutumbakam and Dharmo Rakshati Rakshataha. Those two, in this particular case, come together heads on. And then you have kinds of terrible narrative that's being promulgated by different people around the world about our beliefs, about our values, about our principles, and about our very, very identity. Am I supposed to just turn the other cheek like Gandhiji might have suggested if he was alive? Or an eye for an eye? What's my dharma in this case?
Great, great, great question. I think it's both. I think it's yes and. Yes, Vasudhaiva Kutumbakam. The world is a family, absolutely. We should never never, ever, ever let go of that truth. It was so beautiful the way he gave that as the motto of the G20. I mean, and really shared it with the world. I think it's a core teaching of our Sanskriti.
Sure.
And you mentioned you're a father, a grandfather. There must have been times you've had to discipline your kids. There must have been times when you had to send your kids to their room and they weren't allowed out of their room for some period of time. And as our families grow, the bigger the family, the likelier it is that there's going to be someone who may not be invited to all of the family events because they're going to show up drunk and they're going to create conflict and they're totally unpredictable. They may even be violent. They may be someone with an alcohol issue, a drug issue, a mental issue, whatever it may be. But simply because someone is family doesn't mean that you condone how they behave. It doesn't mean that you don't discipline them. It doesn't mean that there aren't consequences or ramifications for their actions. I mean, if your son or daughter or sister or brother or other family member burnt down your home, okay, you wouldn't kill them, but you also wouldn't ignore it. You wouldn't just say, oh, no problem, we'll build another one and then you can burn that one down too. There would be ramifications in your relationship. There would be consequences. Some of those consequences might be judicial and legal, you know, penalties. You would do all sorts of things to make sure. And that they didn't burn down other people's houses. So I think it's important to recognize that just because we realize people are a family doesn't mean that we have to accept everything they do. It doesn't mean we have to tolerate everything they do. It doesn't mean that we don't have the power and the autonomy to protect ourselves. I mean, there's a lot of families tragically in the world where children and women are abused emotionally, physically, sexually. You would never say, oh, well, he's your husband, just let him do it. Or, oh, he's your father, just let him do it. Or he's your brother, let him do it. Vasudev Kutumbakam. You'd say, whatever he may be, this has to stop. And you would protect yourself. You would make sure to protect yourself. And you would make sure that he was, removed and not able to harm anyone again. You would never say to a wife, oh, just put up with it. He's your husband. He's family.
Sure.
Or to a child being abused, oh, it's okay. You should bow down and touch your parents' feet anyway, even if they're abusing you. No, that's what we have children's services for, to get kids in situations like that out of homes where they're being abused. You could never say to a children's, social worker, oh, well, we're family, so the kid is better off here, even though we're beating him to a pulp every day. So it's really important, I think, in our hearts for us to have that oneness, that love, that compassion that comes from recognizing that people are family, while we simultaneously make sure that we are protecting not just ourselves, but protecting the rest of our family members, right? If you had, imagine that you had 4 or 5 children and one of them became drug addicted and violent. Well, you wouldn't let them bring a gun into the house. You'd be afraid not only for you, but you'd be afraid they're going to kill your other kids. You would do whatever you needed to do. And again, you wouldn't kill him or her, but you would do whatever you needed to do to protect the rest of the family. And I think that that's That's really what's needed today, is an openness in our hearts, a love in our hearts, a recognition of oneness in our hearts, a peace in our hearts, while we simultaneously recognize that peace does not mean that you become a doormat. Spirituality does not mean you be a doormat. It does not mean that you let people walk all over you. There's no spiritual teaching I know that says, thou shalt be a doormat.
And I think
So we are,
yeah, please, yeah.
we're compassionate, we're compassionate and loving, but strong. And, you know, our Mahabharata, our Bhagavad Gita, our Ramayana, we've got these perfect examples, brilliant examples of what love and Dharma in action look like when you need to protect the society and yourself.
Yeah, and that's a wonderful perspective to bring to the table, and thank you for doing that. You know, a lot of times these principles get completely misunderstood and misused. You know, secularism is another one. You know, secularism means, you know, you can just walk over me and take over what is mine just because, you know, we're all secular. So yeah, but thank you. I think that's a very important nuance that needs to be understood in the society at large. I think on that note, Sadhviji, I want to thank you from the bottom of my heart, and I'm sure my colleague here feels the same way.
I'd like to add quickly that, you know, there are some things that were, I will have to use the word bothering me or going through the mind in the last week or so, in the last 24 hours or so. And my father always used to say, get in a satsang with a learned person. And I'm so blessed to be in your presence. And I think all of the questions that we asked, but there are some questions we didn't even ask and we got the answers for. And that is the beauty of the Sanatan Satsang. So I really, really am thankful from all of the VHPA members, and anywhere we are from all Sanatans, I would like to bow to you.
Thank you. Thank you so much.